Hello, friends. Happy Halloween. That's why I'm wearing my little Easter glasses. I'm a little bit of a minimalist, and this is the only thing I had hanging around. So I'm very excited. Today, we have a special guest with us. He is a licensed therapist, and he's going to be talking about a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, which is how to prevent nurse burnout, how to deal with nurse burnout. So without further ado, let me bring him on. Hello.
Hi, good morning. Good morning.
So, Travis, go ahead and introduce yourself and share your socials with us. I'll also link them after the live in the description below if you want to subscribe to his channel.
Sure. So as Bridget said, I am Travis. I work as a licensed marriage and family therapist located in Southern California. I've been practicing now for about 9 years. Um, I work in both a kind of outpatient HMO hospital setting in their psychiatry department where I do therapy, as well as assess and triage for crisis. And then I also have a small private practice I run and do therapy there as well. Um, and I'm a dad of 3 kids, kind of busy. um, but I love doing therapy, love working with individuals, love helping people find healing. Much like most of you, most people, nurses get into the field to help. They're helpers at heart and want to help and bring healing and help people kind of recover. And so being in the helping profession, most people, they really have a heart to help people, again, heal and walk through recovery and kind of come out the other end. So to find me on my socials, as Bridget said, is YouTube, real simple, youtube.com/Travis Goodman. So just my name. I have also an Instagram channel that I run. I also have a side passion and heart to help bring mental health awareness to men, and more specifically fathers. That tends to be kind of a little niche there, that men and fathers kind of in general are more left out of the conversations around mental health or have other barriers. And so I try to bring just basic awareness. So I have an Instagram account called Therapy for Dads, which is the number four. And then I have a podcast also named the same thing, which is on any podcast platform, Therapy for Dads, where I interview individuals talking about different topics around mental health, specific topics, and then somehow linking it to men and fathers and kind of bringing that awareness. So that's kind of me in a nutshell, kind of what I do and some of the stuff that I do on the background on top of being a dad. So yeah, thanks, Bridget. And I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. And Mr. Midwife, hi, how are you? He said, love the glasses. Thanks. I still got it. Mr. Midwife, I have to get him on the show. So we are going live today so early because Travis and I are actually on opposite coasts. So
Mm.
it's the only time we could find that worked for both of us. So thank you for watching. If you're watching this on the playback again, it's just he's going to give us some great tips. So, Travis, if you could start us out with what is burnout in general, or what is nurse burnout?
Sure. So burnout, and really, we could term it nurse burnout or burnout, but burnout. First thing I want to get across is that really it could affect anyone. Today we're focusing on nurses specifically, and actually there's a lot of data showing. In fact, some of the most recent data is showing from some uh, um, surveys put out there that a lot of nurses and LPNs, RNs, around 35%, 40% are reporting feeling burnt out or are burned out, have been burned out. I also recently had on a orthopedic surgeon on my podcast a few weeks back, who he's got a big actually passion to help all medical professionals. And he said the burnout rate is closer to 50 because there's a lot of unreported burnout. So he said it's actually even higher. And usually the burnout's happening within the first 2 to 3 years once people begin to practice, whether they're doctors or nurses or anyone in the helping profession, medical. So it's pretty high, especially post even COVID. There's been a higher percentage. So it's really, really high. A lot of people are leaving the field. So, but burnout in general, to give a quick definition, really, it's really physical and emotional or mental exhaustion accompanied by decreased motivation, lowered performance, and kind of negative thoughts or feelings or attitudes towards self or to others or both. So it's really kind of a general definition of burnout. And burnout currently is not a uh, medical or mental health diagnosis. Now, it could change. It might change. It's one of those things that things evolve over time within the medical mental health profession, where something that maybe in the past wasn't recognized is now recognized. I personally think it should be recognized given its pervasiveness and how many people it's affecting. Um, but that's a good just general definition is kind of again that physical, emotional, mental exhaustion with a decreased motivation, lower performance in work or even at home, and with kind of negative feelings or thoughts towards self or others.
So, would you say like cynicism is, could that be a sign of burnout?
Sure. Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's definitely a sign. So some signs can be um, definitely cynicism, like negatively cynicism towards self, towards others, towards or towards your work, or pessimism. So definitely some of those are kind of emotional signs, or like thought signs for sure. Cynicism absolutely is one of them, I would say. Especially if you especially if it's a shift in your behavior. If you haven't been a cynical person in the past where maybe you're typically you know, positive and outgoing and ready to get work done, and then now you just find yourself in this really I can't think of the right way to say it. Cynicism,
Sure.
cynical. That's the word.
Cynical.
Being very cynical. I couldn't think. It's 5 a.m. So anyway, it's 5 a.m. my time. In case you're wondering, so my brain it's coming online. So cynical, or if you find yourself just really pessimistic and just kind of funk, or irritable, moody. And I'm going to talk about as we kind of go through some of these signs, there's some other warning signs too. And with burnout, I can say this, it can trickle over into more than burnout. In fact, I've worked with a number of individuals where it moves beyond these burnout kind of signs. And again, one day I think it might be recognized as some type of mental health or some type of, it might come in the new DSM, but who knows? I mean, who knows? But I'm not going to go there. It's a different episode that we'll talk about. But it could then trickle into depression. I've seen it go beyond burnout, where now the individual is struggling with like a major depressive episode because now it's going beyond just these other signs. I've even seen trickle over into some people. Now they're having panic attacks. Now they're generally overly anxious, and now they're having maybe an anxiety disorder or an anxiety episode. I've seen it even trickle over into things of, depending on the individual and what they've seen, some kind of PTSD or vicarious trauma, things like that. So it's kind of like, if it's not taken care of, or if we're not addressing what's happening, it can, and I have seen it move into something a little more pervasive and a little more uh, heavier, and where we need a lot more treatment, and then that could really have a negative impact on the person's life. So we want to be mindful of that and be aware, definitely.
What are some other signs of burnout, would you say?
Some other signs you're going to see, there's kind of both these internal and external signs. Um, and you may relate, those watching, listening, you might relate to a couple of these, some of these, none of these. And so these are just some that have been documented in different research, questionnaires and surveys. And so some internal signs, like you mentioned, Bridget, is definitely cynicism is a big one. Um, like I said, emotional exhaustion, where you're just kind of emotionally done and like tapped out. You don't really have your tanks are done, or your emotional tank or reserve when you go into the day is like very tiny. It's like it gets used up maybe with that first patient that you see. We're used to, do your whatever, 8, 10, 12, 14-hour shifts and have a lot to give. I mean, definitely having tired, but you're like, your first time you walk in the door, you're just like, and I'm done, right? Some other signs are definitely detachment from work, or your work or your work life, where you're just kind of like, you're maybe maybe doing your rounds or something, but you're just kind of going through the motions, maybe a little numb, maybe just like you just kind of have this distance between you and what you used to do. It could also then affect your internal felt sense of feeling ineffective as a nurse, as a medical professional, where You just feel maybe you're just not having the impact like you once had. And like I mentioned before, maybe feeling drained even before you step into the building. You wake up and you just like you're like again, your emotional reserve is really low. That's something I see a lot of. It's like you wake up and you're kind of already done. You step in the door and you're really done. And then some people could have a loss of motivation. You could definitely, some people could have some anxiety, internal anxiety, maybe some excessive worry, um, and pessimistic. Some of the external signs now, kind of moving outward to our body, um, people could have maybe pain, that maybe neck and shoulder pain they're not used to having, and just or other areas are more achy than normal. Some people can have insomnia, or definitely sleep issues where maybe they're not sleeping well and they're kind of really restless sleep. Um, for some, there's been shown from some surveys that getting sick more often, lowered immunity, where your body's not healing. Often is probably more often than not, it's linked to like poor sleep. If we're not sleeping, we're not recovering. We tend to have a lower immunity anyway, so that's kind of part of it. And then for some other external science too is how we're acting, our behavior. What are we doing to manage and cope? And some of the more negative external behaviors would be maybe increase or first time use of alcohol, maybe increase or first time use of kind of like other maybe substances. For some, maybe increase distracting, like on, nowadays, like on our phones, like we're seeing more use of apps like TikTok, social media, where now we're burning hours on this stuff and just kind of numbing out, or maybe, we're binging more than we normally would on, Netflix, things like that. Um, Maybe not going to the gym anymore like you once did. Maybe so you're going to see other behavioral patterns too. Maybe eating more junk food, things like that. Where you're going to see this pattern and this rhythm over time, and it's going to slowly get worse and worse, because for some of us, we'll get stuck into it. And the farther we go, it's hard to kind of come back into healthier habits and to be aware. So those are some of the signs. I know there's a lot I just rattled off, but I think they're important because it's kind of a spectrum. You're going to see kind of this depth, so to speak, of these different experiences that people can have when they're feeling burnt out. And for some people, there's this thing where you're starting to burn out, like it's like you're down the path, and some people are just downright, they've hit the wall and they're done. And they're, when they're there, that's usually when I see some other things like depression, maybe some other anxiety disorder, PTSD, things like that, because it's like they can't function. They've hit that wall. They're not burning out, they're burnt out. Like there's nothing left, and that's when we really have to, that can be scarier, because sometimes when people get there, that's sometimes when they leave, they're done with the profession. I'm out, I can't do this anymore. And sometimes they need to, because it is like they can't find a way to manage or maintain. And there's various factors as to why that might be impacting them, whether it's their own decision making, like their own life, or stuff happening at work with their managers or boss, where maybe there's some not so good stuff happening there, and they're not workable. And so sometimes the best thing is to leave, which is really sad, because a lot of these people have spent so much time and effort putting into this profession, and they really do care. So I know I answered another question there. So, but those are some of the signs. Sorry for sharing more than I did.
You're fine. So I like to just share my story, because
Mm,
sometimes when we share our stories, it helps for others to recognize things. So for me, when I was in bedside, the night before, I would get knots in my stomach. I would
mm,
get that feeling of apprehension and anxiety, because it's always like, for me, it was the fear of the unknown. What am I going to walk into tomorrow?
yeah. And I'm guessing that was
So
more than normal for you.
it was pretty much like every shift that I worked was
Mm,
that feeling of apprehension.
mm,
So that was when I started noticing, like, okay, this is, something's not going on right. Something's not right.
mm,
Definitely, I think as nurses, most of us will have cynicism.
mm,
Maybe it's an unhealthy coping strategy, but if you look at our, we share some of the most savage memes. It's, I don't know. So that was interesting to
mm,
find out that that's a part of nurse burnout. And I never, so the emotional exhaustion, if you're a nurse and you are feeling emotionally exhausted, then do some introspection and you may need to
Hmm.
shift paths from where you are. So for me, what it took was shifting from bedside to, I did education for a little bit. I got my master's in nursing education and then I went back to school for FNP. I'm much happier and I found my niche, right? I've been
Mm.
working in telemedicine, and I found my niche. Like I'm happy. I don't get those feelings of anxiety. So you don't necessarily have to quit nursing. You can go into another avenue, another
Yep.
field. Um, Within nursing, there's informatics. There's you could do labor and delivery, but like Travis said, there's going to be signs before and who was it that said it that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure? Was that Ben Franklin? So it's better for you to recognize these signs before you actually hit that wall, and now you've developed depression or generalized anxiety disorder, and it could just lead you down a dark path. Or even if you start experimenting with things, I know nurses that, me personally, I don't drink, but I know nurses that will like that's their coping mechanism. And I put it in quotes because that's not a healthy coping mechanism. Like well, I mean, one drink
Right.
is okay, but if they're having a whole bottle, then clearly they're self-medicating with alcohol or other
Hmm.
substances.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think what you said too is key. And your story, like you said, is completely helpful to hear because you hear the reality of what you felt. And it's not just leaving, but there's different things you can do. You're right. There's a spectrum of what you can do, depending on where what your training specifically is in and the job options available for you. There's definitely a lot of things you could change up because maybe it's the environment that maybe you're in. Because sometimes there is a reality that some environments are just really not.
They're
Maybe you could speak
toxic.
to this, or they're toxic, and so and you could probably speak to that, is that some environments just are, like, sometimes just it's not so much you, it's and not even so much the patients, but sometimes just the environment and maybe because you're walking into an environment of people that are already burnt out, and so that's what they're doing to cope, and so you walk in, and then you're just kind of met with this wave of other people's burnout symptoms and cynicism where it just kind of degrades you versus like a supportive environment or maybe the management is not run so well. I mean, really there's great management out there, great bosses, and sometimes it's like, man, you're dealing with someone who's like, what am I walking into? Um, so sometimes it is just changing the environment. Maybe you go somewhere else and you're like, oh, wow, I feel great. Wow, this is so much better, you know? So it's going to be so unique to the individual. And so I'm glad you shared what you said, is because you just switched what you're doing. Now you love it. You found a niche,
Mhm.
and you're fine. You're like, oh, this is great. Like I love what I do now.
Mhm.
And it's going to be so kind of unique to the individual because it really is. Every individual, like when I work with someone, I have to really assess, tell me your story. You know, what, who are you, first of all? How did you get to feeling burnt out? Like, I need to understand their narrative to know, like, what are those factors that are impacting their burnout? Is it just the environment? Is it other things going on at home? Is it just kind of an internal state that I need to work on and help them change, kind of just their internal dialogue or monologue or self-talk, things that they're doing? Are they, is it just negative behaviors that have just, or poor unhealthy habits that have just over time have led them to getting burnt out because they don't have a good holistic care plan to take care of themselves to recover? So, or is it all the above or some combination? So it really is different per person.
And that leads us to our next segue is how do we prevent burnout? And you've worked with nurses, so
Mhm.
feel free to share what you've experienced when you work with nurses and how we can prevent this in the nursing profession or even in healthcare in general.
So I would say, and generally speaking, um, I would say that when I've worked with the nurses that I have worked with, and other medical professionals too, a couple things stand out. One, there's definitely a theme of like the medical profession not training or educating well enough, in general. And some are, by the way. You may have gone to a program. Some other nurses on here that are watching may have gone to a program that did this, but by and large, there's really a lack of education on kind of holistic health for the nurse themselves or for the medical professional. It's, schooling is rightly so focused on how do we help the patient? How do we help the family member? How do we have the person in front of us? Which of course you need to know that, because that's, you got to help the person in front of you. But there's a lack of, well, how do I take care of me after I've spent, a double shift or whatnot? When I go home, what does it look like for care for me? So there's no real talk about care of self. It's always about the patient, 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 patient. Um, and so I think there's a little bit of imbalance there. And again, I'm thinking back to my interview with his name's Darren. He said, yeah, the problem is like we're trained to take care of it. We don't know what to do with ourselves. And so, in fact, in some cases too, in some of these hospital settings, is that you're actually even applauded for working more and putting the patient first, and sometimes even looked down upon if you maybe say no to something. So there's even an environment of like, you need to sacrifice for the patient or sacrifice for the family, right? Or the team. You can't say no and go home and rest or do something like you're going to let the team down or the family down. And so there's even this kind of, it- you know, unspoken or even very explicit environment of, you can't care for yourself because if you do, you're letting us down. So kind of the shame culture, guilt, where, oh, I can't do this. I have to stay. And so there's even some of the education definitely needs to change. So that's a piece that, I don't have control over. I know individual nurses don't have control over, but the hope is that either there are educational systems that are starting to change to talk about this, but definitely a whole systemic change needs to happen for sure. So I just wanted to say that first, is that there is kind of like, it needs to start from like training before you get to the, you're a nurse now, or, an NP or whatever you're doing. There needs to be kind of a top down change.
Mr. Midwife said that, and this is kind of like the systemic change that needs to happen,
Mhm,
that they can start by changing patient ratios. Let me have a chance to use the restroom. Let me have a chance to have something to
mhm.
eat. Let me recharge on my 12-hour shift. And that goes back to that toxic culture. And
Yeah.
I understand that there's going to be wonderful physicians. But again, having worked as a nurse, I did experience, whether it was indirect, so just observing verbal abuse from physicians,
Mhm.
or actually experiencing it directly. So it still does
Sure.
happen. There's some great
Totally.
physicians,
Mhm.
but that toxic culture of, there was one time I was at the nurse's station and a nurse had just gone on her break. And in a 12-hour shift, we're supposed to get a 30-minute break, which I can maybe count on my hand the amount of times that I got a 30-minute break. So she went on her break, and we are supposed to run with physicians. Now the physician happened to come by, just, again, like there should be structural changes, like physicians are going to round
Mhm.
between these and these hours or something, right? Because physician expects when he comes on the unit, or he or she, that we are at their beck and call, right? We have our own duties. So physician gets on the unit and he's like, where's the nurse for so and so, right? We're like, she's on break right now. Loses it. Tell that nurse to get off her ASSS
Mhm. Mhm.
and come back here. Make
Mm.
her do some actual work. So that's that toxic culture
Sure.
where it's
Sure.
like, she's on break. Like we
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
one break in 12 hours.
Yep.
But of course, someone went to go fetch her, right?
Yeah.
So it's like we're not allowed to take care of ourselves. We're not allowed to use a restroom. We're
Mhm.
not allowed to go eat.
Yeah. Yeah, so those are definitely some things that need to change, and the environment's different, and, who knows that, not to, not to, like, approve of what that physician did, um, I could say that guy was probably burnt out, and so he's taking it
Mhm.
out on you guys versus, so, or he could have been just not a good individual or has really poor social skills, but, he could have been burnt out, and so that's a sign of burnout too, of just being irritable and, like, you just don't, I'm gonna do because he's stressed out. And not to approve of what he did, because obviously that's inappropriate and not healthy. Absolutely. Obviously, as a therapist, I'm always trying to look to like, why is someone doing that? Like, that's always my thought process is, okay, why did someone
And
react
I think
poorly?
that's healthy. I think if you look at people in that manner, like that makes you more understanding, more compassionate
Right.
versus just labeling him as this villain.
Totally.
Um, so it's something, obviously, that saying like
Hmm.
hurt people, like someone that's
Totally.
in a good mental state is not going to go around and verbally
No,
abuse other people.
absolutely
So
not.
something is going on internally with him.
Hmm.
And that's also important for other nurses to
Yeah.
recognize that.
Yeah. They have their own pressure and stressors too. And again, not to approve of their behavior. Like, it still
Yeah.
could be wrong, it could still be inappropriate, it could still
Mhm.
be right, but, it's that and it's hard to do if you're burnt out. Well, I can say it's hard to have the perspective of that kind of like, "Oh, what's going on for them?" I mean, that takes a lot of emotional capacity to be able to do that, so if you're already done, like, you're not gonna be able to see the person that way. It's
Mhm.
or it'll be really difficult too because you're done. So to hold someone else's emotional like that, because now they're the jerk. They're the and obviously it's a jerk move to do. So I would agree with you. But going back to what Mr. Nurse said, Mr. Midwife Nurse, I think it came
Mhm.
across the screen. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think what needs to change is allowing that. Okay, we need those breaks. We're human. We need to pee. We need to be able to have water. We need to be able to have food. If you're doing your 12, whatever your long shift is, you need that to sustain yourself to actually perform well. Because if you've gone that long on a shift and haven't eaten anything and haven't gone to the bathroom or like just sat down just for even 10 minutes, that you need a recharge, especially if you do this multiple times because your body physically will actually start to feel the effects of that.
If
Um,
you're dehydrated, you can't think
you
clearly. If your blood
can't.
sugar is low, my husband is one that if
Mhm,
his blood I can fast, but my husband, we all react to things differently. If he doesn't eat for 2 hours, he's like,
mhm,
"Oh, I'm lightheaded.
yeah,
I'm going to pass out."
mhm, yeah,
And at many nurses station well, at many units, we're
mhm,
not allowed to have water on even at, like
yeah,
we have, like, charting stations. We're
mhm,
not allowed to have water at the charting station. They expect us to keep it, like, in the break room, but who has time to go to the break room?
right,
So,
right. They should have
some
water there.
places
Yeah,
exactly. Some places are, beginning to have, like, a hydration station, so it's, like, in the nursing unit,
yeah,
and maybe as you're walking by, you can take a sip of water, but
yep,
I
yep,
mean, sometimes it would be to the point where I like, you know what? I don't depending on the manager, like, I would hide my water behind a computer, or I
yeah,
keep granola bars in my pocket, and as I'm charting, I'm eating even though I'm not supposed to,
mhm,
right? I
yeah,
mean, if you have to go to the bathroom and eat your granola bar in the bathroom, I mean, like, this is
yeah,
this is how bad it is sometimes in
yeah,
nursing. But, like,
yep,
do what it takes for you to stay healthy. If you have to
mhm,
eat in the bathroom because you can't get a break anywhere else, then so be it, but we can't
yeah.
go full 12 hours without eating.
I agree, and that needs to I would agree that needs to change, and I keep going back to this conversation, because he coined this term and I didn't. I think it's such a beautiful term. He calls it the healthcare athlete. Darren Davidson, the physician that I interviewed.
Mhm,
But he's by the way, he's a really good physician, really good
mhm,
heart. He really cares about everybody. Like he's the good ones, right? I'd say he's one of the good ones that you nurses probably
mhm.
love to work with. Like, oh, we want to work with Darren. Like he's the guy I want to work with because he really truly cares. And he calls it and he really speaks to the all medical professional. Like we're athletes, if you think about it, the healthcare athlete. Um, and the big thing we need to do is we need to recover. We need hydration. We need to rest in order to perform. Because if you think about what you nurses are doing every single day, it's like you guys are every shift is
Like
it's
a
like
marathon.
it's like a marathon. It's like a match. It's like the biggest match, if you're baseball, whatever term you think of, it's like this is like it's a marathon, this is like the World
Or a game,
Series,
yeah.
this is like whatever it is. And so he talks about that we have to treat ourselves as such so we can continue to perform at such a high level. But in order to do that, he's like the biggest thing, even for physicians, he says, he's like, is hydration. We don't drink water, whether because we can't or we don't have time, or we're trying to get stuff done, so we don't. So it's either we don't do it, we don't prioritize it, or it's
Mhm,
the thing like we don't allow water here. So it's this thing is we need to drink. We need to go to the bathroom. We need some food to help our brains because here's the reality, right? If you're running your brain starts to slowly degrade throughout the 12-hour shift, your performance because you're not feeding itself. There's no fuel to burn left. And so it starts to just there's nothing left. And so you can get lightheaded, foggy brain,
mhm.
right? It's like because internally even physically, you guys are usually moving a lot, right?
Yes.
So you're moving a lot on your feet, but internally, because you're taking on all
Thinking.
this patient information and processing and thinking, it's like you're running 2 marathons, like, physically, because 'cause you're moving so much, so your body's burning all these calories, but the internal movement is so much because you're trying to
Mhm.
calculate all this. Like, you're thinking, you're looking at charts, you're trying to think of, okay, what do we do here? How do we triage this patient? So there's all
Mhm.
this internal movement happening too. And if you haven't fueled yourself, if you haven't had a sip of water, um, your performance will slowly start to degrade over that shift because you physiologically cannot keep up. Um, and then more importantly too, what do you do after the shift? How do you recover and rest after that, like, marathon? Are you doing things outside of your match, your event, your marathon? Outside of that, how are you prioritizing rest and recovery? Are you prioritizing rest and recovery? Are you doing things that are truly promoting rest and recovery? Or are you doing things that are actually not really enabling you to fully rest and recover to prep you for the next shift? Because that's also a key important too. It's not just what's happening in and at work, but outside of that is also vitally important.
What are some things that we can do for rest and recovery, for example, other than like getting a good night's sleep?
Mhm.
Let's talk a little bit about nutrition, and what are some other things that we can do?
Yeah, well, so some things we could do outside of that. Um, Definitely nutrition. I mean, since you said, I'll say, of course, nutrition, right? That's always, you hear that. What are you eating? And it's actually very, very true. Depending on what you're eating. Um, and if you think of pro athletes, right? I mean, those men and women, and they're not eating, a ton of junk food all the time, unless you're like Michael Phelps. Sure. I mean, obviously, we all know Michael Phelps' routine, but that's not normal.
Yeah,
That's
he's the exception.
He was the exception. He was, I think the guy was trying to get calories down, so he's eating anything and everything, because of what he was. So that we can't think of him. He's not a good standard to base our life based on Michael Phelps and what he was eating, because that's not us. But in general, if you look at pro athletes that are performing this, top female athletes, top male athletes, if you watch what they eat, man, their nutrition is dialed in specifically for who they are. They have, and obviously none of us have nutritionists. Maybe you do watching, maybe you have a nutritionist, but they have nutritionists following them. They have this team helping them so they can continue to perform at peak performance. So we have to, and part of that is definitely diet. So what are you putting into your body? Now, it's fine if you have some treats or something, but I'm saying in general, what are you fueling your system with? Because it's so key. Nutrition is so important. Are you having good, healthy fats, proteins, and carbohydrates? Or are you eating a ton of processed food? If you're eating a lot of processed food, it's gonna affect you. It really, truly is. Now, it's okay if you go and eat some stuff from time to time. I'm not saying that. I'm saying in general, though, what are you fueling yourself with? So definitely starts with nutrition. Starts with hydration. Water is a big one. So are you drinking enough water offline, or you continue to stay dehydrated? So nutrition is that. Being mindful of, you mentioned alcohol. So being mindful of your alcohol intake. And there's people have different beliefs on this, and there's definitely a spectrum of use around this. Some people, they don't drink at all. Some could argue that's probably better. Hey, don't worry about drinking. Some people are like, yeah, it's fine. I have it socially. So I want to say be mindful of, and I think from a mental health perspective, I would go to what's the use of the alcohol. So it's not so much the alcohol. Again, I know some people would disagree with me, but it's not so much the alcohol. It's the use of it. Why are you using it to socialize? Or are you predominantly using it to, oh, this is my de-stressor? A lot of times when we're burnt out, especially if alcohol is your go-to, that tends to be one of the ways that's our de-stressor. So that would lead to, if that becomes your de-stressor, and that's like a daily de-stressor, um, well, over time, that begins to have a negative impact on sleep. You will sleep, you will fall asleep, but you won't have restful sleep, because when you have alcohol in your system, and you guys know this better than I do as people who study the body, I'm more the head, is, well, you don't tend to go to stage 4 deep sleep, restful sleep, where your body recovers, because your body has to deal with all the alcohol and the sugar in its system, in its kidneys and the liver. So you're not going to go to that rested sleep. So you'll sleep, you might fall asleep quickly, but you're not going to have sleep. In fact, you'll also stop dreaming, depending on how much alcohol you're having. You won't really get to REM sleep, which is that recovery state as well. Um, And there's a lot of, you could read research on this as well. So we need to be mindful of what are you drinking and how much. So if you're drinking and this is your de-stressor, I would say, well, let's be mindful. Let's do something else. Let's maybe replace that glass of wine or two glasses of wine or whatever, or two beers, three beers, or that whiskey. Let's replace it with, okay, I'm feeling stressed and I need to find something else. So instead of drinking, let's replace it with things like, I'm a big fan of a few things. Journaling is a big one. I know it might seem like, oh, I don't want to journal. Well, I would make an argument that I think that might be healthy because we need a healthy outlet of what you're dealing with, of what are you really feeling and thinking. So let's start with something simple, especially if you've never journaled before. If this is new for you, if I'm like, I don't know what to write, well, there's a few things I tend to teach all my clients with as they're starting off journaling for the first time. And it's a really good outlet because what we need to do is if we're dealing with burnout, if we're dealing with just stress at work, we need to find healthy outlets for our mental state to also kind of rest and find recovery. And so one way is journaling. And so you could do two things to start off with. And of course, there's other things you could do, but the two things to do is you could do a mind dump, I call it, meaning get everything out. If that seems terrifying to just get everything out, set a timer on your phone. I don't know, 5 minutes, and just allow yourself just to like, mentally vomit on paper. Like get that negative energy out. Doesn't have to make sense. Doesn't don't censor it. Just like I'm just need to get all this negative energy out. And when the timer goes off, it's like, hey, close the book and put it away. So it's because if we don't get it out, we're just keeping often that stuff inside and kind of just spinning and stewing about it. So it's just kind of sitting in us. It's like a poison just kind of sitting inside. So getting it out mentally starts to find relief. Don't censor it specifically. Just be raw. I mean, here's the thing. This is where you want to be raw. The journal's not going to talk back to you. I mean, it's not going to fight you. It's not going to like
Judge
invalidate
you.
you.
It's not
It's
going
not
to
going to.
judge you.
It's not going to judge you. It's not going to tell you to stop talking. It's not going to do any of those things. It's a really good listener. So that's one thing. The second thing you do is you could also do what I call the high and the low. So the high and the low technique it's really about balance. So it's identifying one thing that was good or positive, um, and writing about it. So what happened? And then what emotions or what thoughts did that kind of bring up for you that was good and positive? So looking for something. So seeking the good, seeking the positive, even if the whole day was hard. Well, I want you to find one thing that was good or positive. Because sometimes when we're burnt out, we have a filter on of just negative, of just the pessimism, just the cynicism. And we kind of filter out any other good stuff, or it's really hard to see it, or we negate the good stuff. And so this is an exercise of, we'll find something good mentally, because there is something positive. There always is. It's not all negative. Never, ever, I'm never, if you actually scanned your day, it isn't. It's about perspective. So what happened? What emotions and thoughts and feelings came up for you, and write it down. And then I also, with the high and the low, is I give you also, we'll write the low. What's the one thing that stands out that was really difficult or stressful that day? What's the one thing that was really maybe frustrating for you that day? Sad. What's the thing that really triggered some more distressing emotions, and write that down. So you're finding balance on, here's something that's really hard or difficult for me, but here's something that was also really good. So striking a balance of that internal state and having a space to do it. Now, you could also talk to a friend about this. That's another good place to do it, not just to complain for complaining's sake, but if you have someone that you can be vulnerable with, that you feel you can talk to, that will listen to you, that's actually better than journaling. Because we often seek out healthy relationships to have the space to feel heard, to feel listened to feel someone gets us. So that's even better than journaling. But if you don't have that, hey, start with a journal. So those are a couple quick things you can start with. And there's more I can give you, but just to keep it simple, that's a great place to start.
The
Um,
thing I wanted to point out with the journaling is that the with a lot of our thinking is habitual and it's a pattern.
mhm,
So if we get in the pattern of only seeing the negative, the
mhm,
nice thing about the high and the low is that we are, and Travis, again, you know this, that our brain has neuroplasticity and it continues to evolve and change
mhm,
throughout our lifespan, right? The thought used to be like it was just when we were young. So by creating these neural pathways in our brain, I kind of equate it to this path in the woods, right? If you're
mhm.
your neurons that fire together wire together, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if you are always focusing on the negative, and like Travis said, there is always positive, but if you're always focusing on the negative, then that is what your brain will focus on and go to. That will be
Mm-hmm.
your habitual state of mind. So by doing the highs and the low exercise, it's helping train your brain to create a new neural pathway where you
Mm-hmm.
are saying, you know what, this like this happened, this was positive. So it's important to train your brain to also see the positive, because we do tend to have a more negative bias, whether that because that's an evolutionary acquirement that due to evolution, that if we weren't negative, like we are hyper aware to the negativity because we need to survive. So back in the
Mm-hmm.
day, we needed
Yeah.
to be aware of like, oh, was that a sound? Maybe that's a lion or something. So I do like that, the journaling, the high and the low. Let me see what
Yeah.
Mr. Midwife said. Um, my ex-wife is an
Mm.
emergency nurse. We use
Oh,
each other
that's
all
good.
the time to decompress,
Yeah.
talk it through as a sounding board. And I
Yeah.
think having someone within the profession
Yeah.
that can understand you, and let me, I'll Travis, you can feel free to disagree, but a lot of
Sure.
times, women, I encourage you to tell your men that if you just want them to listen, say, you
Mm.
know what, I just need you to listen to me right now. Because some men love to problem solve. And then women get frustrated when they're trying to talk, and then their partner is trying to like, oh well, maybe you could talk to your manager, and then she gets frustrated like, I just want you to listen. So but preface everything by just saying, I just need to vent, or I just want you to listen, I don't
Mhm.
need a solution. And when you do need a solution, ask for it. Listen, I let's problem solve together.
Yeah, I won't disagree with you there. I think it's a classic thing when I work with couples. It, um, is very much that, and there's various reasons as to why men do that. Problem solving is actually a good thing, but you're right. Often with that, with when I work with a classic dynamic of a man, man woman, is that yeah, women and men need this actually too. They may not be aware of it. That's a whole other thing that I've done my podcast is to, and my mental health pages to really help men say, hey, you actually need this too. It's just you need to bring that awareness. So, but going back to what you said, you're right. Is state your needs. Always state your needs? What do you need? Because you know what, your friend, your partner is not always going to read you right, even if you've known them for a long time, because they're going to go from their perspective on what they think you need. So yeah, just say, hey, you know what, I just need you to listen. In fact, when I tell men this in this classic dynamic, when I work with couples, is, you know what, I'm like, hey Bob, you know, when your wife comes to you, you think that you want to fix it. You know what, you're a good problem solver. You really are. In fact, in your profession, you problem solve. You're really good at this. Like you are awesome. But in this situation, actually, the fix is just listening and validating. That is the fix. Like that's the solution in the moment, because she just needs someone just to be present with her. And they, once that light bulb goes off, it's like, that's all I have to do. I'm like, yeah, that's it. That's all you got to do is just give her, I mean, and sometimes a hug, sitting with her, just repeating back. And I teach, sometimes they have like, what do you mean by repeating? So, I teach them how to do that and basic skills of, reflective listening, things like that. And they realize that's it. And then they can do it. It's just, they don't know that's the fix, because they go to, oh, I need to actually fix the problem. And they're like, oh, how do I talk to your manager? And so that's very something I see, 9 times out of 10. So I totally agree with what you said. That's a very common, very, very, very common thing. It's just really giving men the tools of, here's the fix. They're like, oh, I could do that. I'm like, yeah, just, and then once they know, it's simple. It's like, I could totally do that. And then if they do come to a place of solution, because often the first thing is hearing them, and then after that, then you could talk about, okay, practically, what is there anything I can do to help you? And then the person may say yes or no, and then if they say yes, great, now use that skill of problem solving to help them. But if not, then you did your job, ma'am. So
Mhm.
totally key. And I love what Mr. Midwife said. That's excellent. I think, in fact, that is that's the best way for us to decompress, is in a safe, uh, vulnerable, intimate relationship, whether it's romantic intimacy or just a friend, because we could have intimate friends where it's not romantic, but it's like where you can be vulnerable with them. So the best way for our design, and how we're wired, is actually in relationship. So that's the best way. Not all of us have that. I get that. But if we do, that's the most healthy way, most like kind of holistic way. And some of us, again, I know we don't have that. So journaling would be the next bad, or there's other ways we can do that too.
So I know that we gave ourselves a time frame of an hour, so we have
Hmm.
about 10 more minutes.
Sure.
Any other uh, tips
Hmm.
for recovering? Let's say
Yeah.
recovering from burnout.
Yeah.
Even, I mean, you haven't mentioned it yet, but even like therapy, right?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, so obviously, yeah, therapy for sure, and then really when you look at your day to examine your day, so journaling is good, but, meditation, mindfulness practices, I know it's kind of, "Oh, meditation," but no, there's actually so much data and research to show that breath work works. I mean, I teach all my clients other different breathwork exercises. In fact, I have a few videos I've released recently on like real simple, like 3 minute, 4 minute, 5 minute, just to start with something and then build it over time. Even at work, like having a moment to take a breath and be aware, like aware of like how am I doing and thinking. Going back to the journaling, which is why I like that. You become aware of your thoughts and you start to see these patterns. And then once you see it, you can then start to change it. You start to challenge it. And that's so key. But so breath work is good, mindfulness practices. Some people do meditation, exercise, yoga. So really holistic with diet, all these things, sleep, hydration. We really want to treat the whole person. Are you having good social interactions as well? Are you filling that social tank with people that fill your tank socially? Um, some other things we could be thinking about is definitely therapy. If you're starting to really struggle, um, talk, seek help. I mean, we're here. I mean, we're helpers too, as mental health professionals, as therapists. We want to help you too, and say, okay, what's going on? How can we help you? Is it more than just burnout? Are we starting to get depressed? And so, helping you see those signs too, and start to get treatment so things don't get worse. Um, Something else with recovery is um, we want to. And my brain just stopped working for a second because it's 5:50. It was working. Um, but meditation, mindfulness. I'm going backwards in my head. I do this often.
With breath work, can you
Oh,
tell me a little bit about, well, if you remembered, you can go ahead and go through, but why is breath work so effective?
well, I'm glad you asked, Bridget. Breath work is so good because it's connected to our physiology and our nervous system. When we're burnt out, when we're anxious, when we're stressed, our nervous system often is in fight or flight mode. Especially when we're in a stressful environment. You sometimes often in nurses, if you're in triage, like you go into that state of fight or flight because you're dealing with the stress, and so your brain goes into how do I survive this? How do I help this person survive? So you go into this state, this internal state, and so we can kind of get stuck in this constant fight or flight state inside, and then not know how to shut it off when we get outside of our environment, our work environment. We could kind of stay in that state, and we don't have good practices to kind of de-escalate from that state. So breath work is one main one, because when we start to slow our breathing, we begin to kind of activate our polyvagal nerve and our vagus nervous system, because that's actually what kind of triggers our fight or flight response, which is always on. It's always active. It's always present. We can't turn it off, but we can become aware of it and help calm it down. So one basic breath work is box breathing or 4-7-8 breathing. In fact, I have a short video on this on my YouTube channel, but that's a great way to slow down. I mean, breath work can reduce stress. Breath work can reduce anxiety. It can help with depression, help with pain. It could help with a whole slew of, uh, um, physiological responses. It could help with reducing panic symptoms. If you're having with PTSD or vicarious trauma, it could help your nervous system stay in a calm state. So staying in that calm state is really, really important. Um, my kids are starting to wake up, as you hear in the background. Um, oh, hi, buddy. Hi, dude. How you doing? You good? Okay. My son just woke up.
Oh.
So breath work is one of those things. So I want you to treat breath work and meditation. If you've never done it, it's like, hi, bud. It's a practice that you for sure have to do more than one time. This is
Mhm.
not you're going to do it one time and be like, oh, everything's great and it worked. It's like, no, this is one of those things that it's like going to the gym. It's repeated practices can have over time a positive effects. It's going to help that internal self with burnout, because when we're in burnout too, again, that pessimism. If you practice breath work, it's going to help just your awareness of your thoughts, your feelings, your behaviors, your body sensations, to help you become connected to your whole self, mind, body, and soul. because often when we're in burnout, we're disconnected from our mind, body, and soul. So it's one of those things we have to practice over and over, months, 6 months, a year, and just become part of that natural habit, because you really need to be aware of your whole self, mind, body, and soul. Once you're aware, you can then do something about it. If you don't have the awareness, if you're just on kind of fight, flight, automatic responses, it's going to be hard to know what to change. So breath work is kind of putting a pause. It's like, let me just pause so I can actually activate my prefrontal cortex, actually think clearly and get out of my amygdala kind of fight, flight response. And it might take time, by the way, to get out of that state, because you might have trained yourself to be in that state. Like you said, we might have,
Like survival mode for so long.
we might have been there so long, that's more automatic for us, and to be kind of in a dorsal vagal kind of calm state. And so we might need to practice over and over and over again to help our brain realize, hey, you don't need to be in fight or flight. You can calm down here. Like you can there's no threats. You can calm down, but that's going to take continued practice to build that muscle, so to speak, up. You have to build that muscle, that internal muscle, to do that. So, I mean, there's a whole bunch more, positive effects too. Oh, that's the light for me, bud.
Over there.
It's light, so it looks good in the background, bud.
It's all about the lighting.
It's all about the lighting, bud. I'll show you that. I'll show you one day.
All right, Travis. Well, thank you so much for joining us. If
There's lights on the back.
say
Yeah.
hi, happy Halloween.
You say happy Halloween?
Happy
What's his name?
Halloween.
This is what's your name? What's your name?
Eli.
Eli.
Hi, Eli.
And yeah. Can you say hi?
Hi.
So please, I'll put everything in the description below. Please check out Travis's YouTube channel. He has breathwork on there. Thank you for all the tips that you shared with us today. And if you would like to have him back on my channel, let us know. And yeah, thanks, Travis.
Thanks,
Mr.
Bridget.
Midwife says he has kids too.
Yeah, I have 3. So it's you gotta do what you gotta do, man.
Yeah, when they get older. So Travis, Mr. Midwife's kid actually edits his videos now. So you can put your kids to work in the future.
I will have to do that. This guy he'll probably want to be the one to do that for sure.
Yeah.
So he loves this stuff. So, yeah.
All right. Bye.
Thank you.